Saturday mornings in the neighborhood usually drifted by without incident. But this morning, as the sun barely crested over the rooftops, a silver SUV pulled quietly into the driveway of the corner house, the one that had been vacant for months. Curtains shifted across the street. By the time the garage closed, word had already spread through message threads and group chats. A new couple had moved in. The dog came first, a tall, lean shepherd with mismatched eyes and military posture. Then the woman, dressed in athletic gear, walking with a calm confidence. One item stood out, a holstered sidearm clipped neatly to her hip. Karen, who spent most of her time monitoring movement from her front porch, nearly dropped her coffee. She squinted, then leaned forward, watching the woman stop at the intersection, checking both directions before continuing her walk. No phone in hand. Just the leash, her dog, and the unmistakable outline of steel riding her side. Karen's fingers twitched with indignation. She stepped back inside, fumbled for her phone, and snapped a few photos from behind the blinds. The HOA rules were clear in her mind, even if the law wasn't. This, she thought, could not go unchecked. By the time the woman returned home, Karen had already called the president of the HOA, forwarded the blurry pictures, and typed up an unofficial warning email about visible threats and endangering the peace. Her version of justice was in motion before anyone else even knew a name. At 4 p.m. sharp, 2 police cruisers pulled into the cul-de-sac, engines off, lights not flashing yet. One officer exited slowly, hand near his belt, and knocked on the front door of the new homeowners. A moment later, the woman from earlier opened it. Calm. No confusion in her expression. From across the street. Karen crouched behind her mailbox, straining to hear anything. The woman stepped outside, nodded once, and reached into her jacket. The officer took one half-step back. She produced a slim black wallet. Karen couldn't make out the words. But she caught the glint of a gold badge. Inside the house, another figure emerged, the woman's husband, tall, watchful, but the woman handled the exchange herself. Speaking with quiet authority, the officer straightened his posture and gave a subtle nod. His partner, who had been watching the scene from behind the car door, stepped away and whispered something into his radio. The woman smiled faintly and turned toward Karen's direction, though it was unclear whether she could see the figure crouching awkwardly in the shadows. Then, unexpectedly, the officer offered her a handshake. Karen stumbled back, confused. The cruisers drove off moments later. The next morning, a notice appeared on every mailbox in the neighborhood. Not from the HOA, but from the woman herself. A folded letter. Professional letterhead. A short introduction. No threats. No complaints. Her name was Ava. She was a tactical operations commander with the city police department, and she was now their neighbor. Karen read the letter 3 times, then ripped it in half. Her plan hadn't worked, but in her mind, it wasn't over. It had just begun. Karen didn't sleep that night. Her fingers kept scrolling through forums, HOA rulebooks, and blurry security footage she'd saved from her home system. Her narrative, once so clear, was now tangled in something she hadn't expected: authority. She had called the cops, but the woman answered the door holding a badge. Worse, the officers respected her. That didn't fit the script. But Karen wasn't one to admit defeat. She printed out her email chain with the HOA president, redlined every clause that even hinted at firearm restrictions, and highlighted phrases she believed could be twisted into support for her cause. Her next stop was the HOA board group chat. Safety concern from neighbors, open carry. She typed, potential threat to children. She knew the right words to trigger a response, even if the real threat was just someone she couldn't control. 2 days passed. Ava kept walking the shepherd around the block, just as calm and poised as before. She nodded to neighbors, waved to the mailman, and said nothing about what happened that Saturday. That silence unsettled Karen more than any confrontation would have. There was no apology, no denial, no submission. Then came Tuesday, a dull afternoon, windless and sticky. Karen stood at her window again, waiting. The woman emerged from her home, this time not alone. A younger officer walked beside her, laughing at something Ava said. He carried a training bag on one shoulder. They crossed the lawn and headed toward the community center at the end of the street. Karen's eyes narrowed. Her feet were already moving by the time she arrived. The door had closed behind them, but a flyer had been taped to the window. Neighborhood Safety and Preparedness Session, hosted by Tactical Training Division, Metro PD. She stared at the words, heart thudding. No one had asked her permission. No one had consulted the board. They were using community property for unsanctioned instruction. Inside, Ava stood near the front, showing to attendees the contents of a first aid field kit. Karen pushed the door open with enough force to draw attention. A quiet hush settled. She walked past chairs and ignored every glance, eyes locked on Ava. "You can't just book this space," Karen snapped. "This is HOA property. There are procedures." Ava didn't flinch. "We received written permission from Mr. Langston." She gestured toward the former HOA president, seated casually near the back, sipping coffee. Karen looked stunned. "He doesn't speak for the board anymore. He resigned." Ava raised an eyebrow. "I'm aware." He granted approval before stepping down. "Everything is on file." For a brief second, Karen's mask cracked. Then she turned to the small group of attendees. "This isn't sanctioned. It's an unauthorized assembly. And she's armed." The younger officer stood. Slowly. "Ma'am, you're escalating a situation without cause." Karen scoffed. "You don't scare me. None of this is legal. I'm reporting all of it." Ava walked forward, not aggressive, but firm. "You already did that, remember?" The police responded, and I answered every question. Politely, without hiding behind windows. Karen stepped back, confused by the tone, not threatening, but precise, like a scalpel. Ava handed her a packet. "In case you're unsure, this is the public use charter for this building. And here's the city's firearms policy. You might find it enlightening." Karen didn't open it. She tore it in half again. This time, Ava didn't flinch. She simply turned back to the group and resumed her lesson. Karen stood frozen for a few moments longer. Her audience lost. She walked out, but the door's quiet click behind her didn't sound like retreat. It sounded like a lock, and she wasn't holding the key anymore. The door had closed behind her, but Karen wasn't ready to disappear. She returned home, hands shaking, not with fear, but something more toxic, disbelief, spiraling into obsession. What disturbed her wasn't just that Ava had defied her, it was that no one else seemed to care. The woman walked around armed, claimed authority, and somehow twisted the narrative to make Karen look like the irrational one. That wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. By midnight, she'd composed a new mass email to the HOA board and a handful of carefully selected neighbors. This time, she included a mix of distorted facts, select quotes, and legal jargon copied from outdated message boards. She titled it, "Community Alert, Unchecked Firearms Presence, Possible Militia Influence." She attached the grainy photo of Ava walking the dog, then added a blurry screenshot from her security camera showing Ava stepping into her car again, holster visible, though completely lawful. Karen underlined the phrase, "daily pattern of armed patrol." The responses came quickly, but not the ones she expected. 2 board members replied, politely questioning her tone. One even asked whether she had confirmed any of her claims. Another pointed out that Ava was a decorated officer and that several neighbors had already spoken highly of her after the seminar. Karen didn't back off. Instead, she doubled down, insisting that Ava had weaponized her authority and was setting a precedent for future armed surveillance of residents. The words looked powerful on the screen, even if they had no real foundation. Then she made a move she believed would end it all. She called an emergency HOA meeting. On paper, it was about safety regulation amendments. In reality, it was a personal crusade, carefully disguised as policy. She printed dozens of flyers and stuffed them in mailboxes under the cover of night, each one emphasizing words like danger, compliance, and community values. The night of the meeting, the room filled quicker than expected. Ava arrived quietly and sat near the back, not wearing her badge, not carrying a file, just watching. Her presence alone made Karen's pulse spike. But she pressed forward. Karen took the microphone and launched into her prepared statement. She spoke of rules, of neighborly concern, of escalating tensions and unforeseen consequences. She cited obscure bylaws, questioned officer conduct, and painted Ava as an unpredictable outsider cloaked in a badge. As she spoke, murmurs broke out across the room, not of agreement, but discomfort. The retired judge, Mr. Halverson, raised his hand. "Before we vote on anything," he said calmly, "can you point to any actual incident that proves a violation of law or HOA code?" Karen faltered. "The presence of a weapon is threatening enough." Halverson leaned back. "In this state, licensed carry is legal. You know that." Karen tried to shift, claiming Ava was intimidating others through her position, suggesting she was using her badge to silence criticism. That's when Ava stood. No one spoke. She walked to the front with no notes, no hesitation. My name is Ava Mercer. I've been with the city police for 16 years. My transfer to tactical commander was finalized 3 weeks ago. I came here to live in peace, not to enforce anything, but I will protect my name. Karen scoffed, trying to interrupt. Ava didn't flinch. You've filed multiple false reports. You've misrepresented HOA bylaws. You've created a narrative built on fear. I've collected every communication, every threat, and every lie, and I've forwarded them internally. Karen paled. To who? Ava's voice dropped lower. The city attorney, and internal affairs. For the first time, Karen went silent. Ava turned to leave, but just before stepping out, she said without turning back, You wanted to make me into something dangerous. Now you'll see what dangerous really looks like. The meeting ended in a hush, and Ava's exit lingered in the room like smoke. Neighbors filed out in slow, uncertain clusters. Some avoided Karen entirely, others offered stiff nods, but no one seemed eager to echo her concerns anymore. Even the HOA board remained seated longer than usual, exchanging quiet looks that Karen couldn't read. She returned home with clenched teeth and twitching fingers. Her sense of power, once inflated by whispers and backdoor influence, now felt fragile. The story she had worked so hard to shape about a dangerous woman with a badge and a gun had slipped from her grasp, but she refused to surrender. Within days, she was back to her usual routine, peeking through windows, recording footage from her porch, logging the times Ava came and went. Her new strategy wasn't loud. It was quiet, methodical, and increasingly paranoid. She compiled documents, collected timestamps, and even hired a so-called private investigator, though he looked more like someone who hadn't passed a background check himself. Meanwhile, the neighborhood had begun to shift. Ava, still calm, continued her walks. No badge, no confrontation, just presence. Neighbors who once hurried past her now paused to chat. She offered safety tips, smiled at kids, even helped an elderly couple fix their fence. The same community Karen claimed to be defending was beginning to gravitate toward the woman she tried to exile. Then came the moment that shook Karen's carefully built narrative. A man named Simon buttoned up, always quiet at meetings, posted in the community forum, "Just had Commander Mercer help me de-escalate a road rage incident in front of my house." She didn't even mention her title. She just stepped in, said the right things, and diffused it. I had no idea who she was until afterward. Replies poured in, heart reacts, supportive comments. Even a neighbor who added, "She helped me file a domestic violence report last year. She's the reason I got out." Karen read each line with a sinking feeling. The more people spoke, the more her image of Ava unraveled and her own began to corrode, but she had one card left to play. At the next board meetings, smaller, quieter, with noticeably fewer supporters, Karen stood again. This time, she didn't try to stir outrage. Instead, she requested a policy vote to ban all firearms, concealed or open, on common HOA grounds. The board president, a temporary stand-in until elections, asked if she had legal grounds. Karen smiled. It's a matter of community comfort, not legality. A moment of silence followed. Then the retired judge raised his voice from the back. Comfort doesn't override rights. Not here. Karen bristled. So we allow weapons at playgrounds, mailboxes, HOA meetings. Another voice, cut in soft but firm. The only one creating fear here is you. Karen turned to see an elderly woman, Marcy, standing with both hands resting on a cane. I've lived here 20 years. Marcy continued. And I've never felt safer than I do now. The room stayed quiet. Karen gripped the edges of the podium. Her words stuck in her throat. She looked around, searching for one nod of agreement, but found none. Even the temp president shifted uncomfortably and moved to the next agenda item. The moment passed, and with it, something Karen hadn't expected to lose. Her grip. She exited the meeting early, walked past Ava without looking at her, and stepped into the night. She had thrown every accusation she could muster and none of it had stuck. But in her mind, she wasn't finished because power didn't disappear all at once. It eroded slowly, and Karen, now standing alone, still thought she had enough left to strike back. Karen spent the next week in silence, but not surrender. She'd learned from the fallout. Her previous approach had drawn too much attention to her motives and too little to her carefully constructed story. This time, she would let others carry the message. Anonymous tips, subtle whispers, Quiet seeds planted in the minds of new residents, who didn't know the history. She sent unsigned letters to a few homes at the edge of the neighborhood. They painted Ava as a city enforcer, using her badge to intimidate her way into influence. One line stood out in bold. "She doesn't live among you, she's watching you." She thought it was clever. She thought it would spread. But instead, one of the letters was handed directly to Ava. And Ava didn't ignore it. At the following HOA board meeting, the room was tense before anyone even spoke. Karen entered last, sliding into her usual seat near the middle, shoulders stiff. Ava was already seated in the front row, a plain folder on her lap, her dog resting quietly beneath the chair, eyes scanning every movement in the room. The board president opened the meeting with a dry list of neighborhood violations, trash schedule disputes, typical matters. But halfway through, he paused and looked up. "Commander Mercer has requested time to speak. We've agreed to allow it." Karen's heart thudded once, twice. She stared forward but didn't blink. Ava stood with calm poise, walked to the front, and placed the folder on the podium. She didn't smile. She didn't raise her voice. "I moved into this neighborhood to escape politics, not start them," she said. "I've ignored rumors, emails, and attacks on my character. But this week, a line was crossed." She held up the anonymous letter. This was left on someone's doorstep. Mailed without a name. Sent with intent to defame, intimidate, and isolate. She opened the folder and withdrew several documents. "Here is a record of every report filed against me, every complaint, email, message. Here are my responses, signed, notarized, and cleared by both my department and legal counsel. And here," she paused, holding up a grainy photo, "is a security image of a woman delivering this letter, captured from a doorbell cam. We've enhanced it. Facial match confirmed." Karen felt her stomach twist. Her mouth went dry. "The woman in the image is present tonight," Ava continued. "I won't name her. I don't need to. But this is the last time I'll remain silent." She turned to the board. "You can choose to ignore the pattern of harassment, but I won't. From this moment on, every communication, every attempt to interfere with my family's peace, will be met with legal action." A neighbor coughed. Someone near Karen shifted in their seat. Ava's voice stayed even. "I swore to protect this city. I never thought I'd need to protect myself from a neighbor." She placed the documents on the table and returned to her seat. The silence was dense, no one daring to move. Karen forced a breath through her nose, fingers digging into the armrests of her chair. The board whispered quietly among themselves. One member passed a note to the president, who read it and nodded. "This matter," he said, "is being referred to our legal liaison for HOA harassment investigation. Effective immediately." Karen stood so quickly her chair scraped across the floor. "You can't." The president held up a hand. "You've had your say, Ms. Dunst. We've received more than one complaint. This is now a board matter." Karen's lips moved, but no words came out. She backed away from the table, avoiding every eye in the room. Her steps were heavy, but she kept walking. Outside, the air was still. No one followed. She turned once, just to glance behind her. But Ava hadn't moved. She didn't have to. The streets grew quieter, but not in the way Karen expected. She thought people would speak less out of fear. But they spoke less out of understanding. Her influence, once maintained by tension and gossip, had been replaced by something she couldn't manipulate, respect. And it wasn't respect for her. The change crept in slowly. A few neighbors who used to forward her emails now left them unread. People crossed the street when she approached. Someone even removed her from the unofficial neighborhood Facebook group, not with an announcement, just a quiet absence. But the most jarring blow came from within the HOA board itself. A letter arrived in her mailbox, unceremoniously folded into a standard envelope. Subject: temporary suspension from board. Participation pending ethics review. There was no hearing, no discussion. Just the printed notice and a signature at the bottom from the interim president. The retired judge had clearly played a role in the decision, but no one dared speak to her directly about it. That silence was the worst part being talked about. But never to. A week passed. The HOA bulletin board ones. Karen's pride now displayed a flyer with a new title, Community Safety Night. Hosted by Commander Ava Mercer, it had been approved, endorsed, and promoted without Karen's input. She stood in front of the flyer for several minutes, hands shaking. The words weren't aggressive. They were inviting. There was no mention of authority or rank. No use of position to intimidate. Just a promise to educate. situational awareness, emergency planning, family safety. Karen ripped the flyer down. By the next morning, 5 more were taped up when the night of the event arrived. She couldn't stay away, though her name wasn't on the guest list. She watched from the sidewalk across the street, arms crossed, lips tight. Cars lined the block. The community center hadn't been this full in years. Even the board president was there, carrying folding chairs from storage. Children laughed in the grass. People smiled as they walked in. Ava stood at the front in civilian clothes. No badge, no holster, just presence. She spoke clearly, answered questions, and never once mentioned her own history unless asked. When a neighbor joked about moving to another city just to be under her command, she chuckled and shrugged it off. Karen couldn't hear most of what was said, but the body language said enough. People trusted her. Near the end of the event, a neighbor she barely knew approached her on the sidewalk. "You coming in?" he asked. She shook her head. He didn't wait for an explanation. Just said, "Your choice," and walked away. Karen stared at the lit windows, the laughter echoing from inside. The way Ava moved so easily among them. She looked like she belonged. Karen felt like a ghost. The next day, she sent another letter, this one anonymous again, but it never reached its target. Someone intercepted it. Later that week, she received a notice from the city. Cease and desist, harassment and defamation. Subject: Ava Mercer. Attached were copies of all the letters, emails and video stills. It wasn't just from the HOA board, it was signed by the city legal department. Karen dropped the letter on her kitchen table and stared at it for hours. Her campaign had spiraled into a legal quagmire. Every move she made now could be used against her. Every word monitored. The shift was complete. Karen had spent months trying to isolate Ava, but now, she was the one who had become invisible. The silence around Karen wasn't just from her neighbors. It had crept into her house too. The phone barely rang. Her inbox filled with unread newsletters, not replies. For someone who once dictated HOA decisions with a few texts and a coffee chat, the isolation was punishing. She hadn't been banned from the neighborhood outright, but it felt that way. The kind of exile that didn't need fences or warnings, just absence. Every conversation happened without her. Every plan moved forward despite her. And worse, every eye she passed on the sidewalk seemed to carry a silent judgment she couldn't erase. When she saw the updated flyer posted again, community safety seminar expanded session, something cracked inside. This time, it wasn't being hosted at the small community center. It was scheduled at the larger town hall, a few blocks outside the HOA's reach, open to neighboring communities, publicized, endorsed by the city, and still hosted by Ava Mercer. Karen showed up before it started, standing across the street, half concealed in the shadow of a street lamp. Cars arrived, then vans, families, retirees, a group of high school students from a local security mentorship program. She watched them stream in, greeted at the entrance by volunteers. She spotted Avenue uniform again, just poised in black slacks and a gray button-up, shaking hands, smiling lightly, directing traffic like she'd done it all her life. Karen didn't hesitate this time. She crossed the street, climbed the steps, and pushed through the doors. The air inside was warm, filled with low conversation and faint music. Folding chairs were arranged in a U-shape, a projector quietly humming in the background. Ava stood at the front, organizing a table filled with pamphlets and tactical gear displays. She glanced up, eyes meeting Karen's for a fraction of a second, but said nothing. Karen walked straight toward her. "I wasn't invited." Ava calmly looked at her. "It's a public seminar. I'm here to observe," Karen said, trying to maintain control in her voice. "You're free to sit, but this isn't a debate. It's information." Karen didn't reply. She took a seat in the third row, arms crossed, expression flat. The presentation began soon after. Ava spoke of neighborhood safety, responding to emergencies, identifying signs of escalating threats. But none of it came across as technical or detached. She tailored her words to the audience. She didn't project superiority. She just shared knowledge delivered with clarity, presence, and something Karen couldn't fake. Lived authority. Then came the open Q&A. A woman raised her hand and asked about handling a stalker. Ava responded with personal examples, layered advice, and legal options. A man asked how to protect his family without relying solely on law enforcement. Ava gave measured suggestions without paranoia or fear-mongering. Karen listened. And she hated what she felt. Because for the first time, she could see what the others saw. Ava didn't just hold rank. She carried weight. There was no moment she stumbled, no overreach, no arrogance. Just calm control. Karen stood up before it ended. She didn't speak. She didn't challenge. She just walked out quickly, without looking back. But as she reached the steps outside, she froze. An off-duty officer stood near the exit, not in uniform, but unmistakably alert. He watched her with curiosity, not suspicion, but the kind that reminded her that people were still watching, not following her anymore, just noticing the way she moved. The way she exited rooms like she didn't belong in them. She walked past him into the dark. For the first time since she started this, she wasn't sure if she'd ever be able to walk back in. Karen didn't return home that night with the same confidence she once carried. Her front door, once a place where neighbors stopped for small talk or requests, now remained untouched. Her porch light flickered, but no one seemed to care. The silence inside was thicker than before. She paced, unsure if the tightness in her chest was anger, fear, or the slow realization that something irreversible had happened. For the first time, she thought of leaving, but Karen never walked away from anything, especially not from what she thought was hers, so she made one last move. She compiled everything she'd collected on audio snippets, clipped photos, surveillance screenshots, fragments of HOA policies, stretched out of context. Then she typed a long, anonymous letter addressed to a local reporter. It was written in dramatic language, full of insinuations. She called it a whistleblower warning. She dropped it in a blue mailbox 2 towns over, wrapped in a plain envelope. Then she waited. 3 days passed. On the 4th, a black SUV rolled slowly through the neighborhood, pausing in front of her driveway. 2 men stepped out. Suits, no badges visible. But Karen had watched enough procedural shows to recognize the rhythm of federal steps. She opened the door before they knocked. Her best performance rehearsed in her mind. But they didn't ask questions. They handed her a sealed document. Search warrant. She laughed out loud at first. For what? False reports. Evidence tampering. Forged communications. Impersonation of a public official. One of them replied, coolly. Your email headers were traced. That anonymous tip you sent to the media was routed through your home Wi-Fi. And the threats sent to your neighbor's mailbox weren't just intercepted. They were signed. Her voice broke before she could deny it. I didn't sign anything. You printed your HOA signature block on the bottom of a document sent to the mayor's office. The man said, flipping a file. You claimed to represent the board. Karen's knees weakened. This is ridiculous. It's criminal. The officers entered calmly. No cuffs, but the message was clear. Word spread by evening. The sight of unmarked agents stepping into Karen's home sent a buzz through every cul-de-sac. Neighbors peeked through blinds. One of the board members was already on the phone with the HOA's attorney. And by morning, the story wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a headline. Local HOA member under investigation for false reports. Harassment campaign, and the article made it worse. It listed names, events, even the quote Karen had once proudly emailed about preserving the moral foundation of the neighborhood. 2 days later, she was removed from the HOA board by unanimous vote. A week after that, she received a formal notice from city prosecutors. Misdemeanor charges were filed, but a quiet agreement was reached. No jail time, just fines. Mandatory public apology and complete removal from any future governance in the community. Her lawyer had negotiated hard to avoid more. But the damage was done. Ava never gloated. She never even acknowledged the outcome publicly. When the apology letter was delivered, typed, signed, and required by the court, Ava simply nodded at the board meeting where it was read, said thank you, and continued discussing the next neighborhood emergency plan. Karen's house went up for sale a month later. No goodbye notes. No farewell party. Just a moving truck that arrived before sunrise and disappeared before noon. The new owners moved in quietly. A young couple, first-time buyers. When they walked the block that evening, Ava greeted them with a smile and a folder of local safety tips. The wife noticed something on Ava's belt. Is that? Ava nodded, adjusting the badge clipped to her waist. City Tactical Unit. The husband smiled. Good to know you're our neighbor. Ava watched them walk, on calm/quiet. At peace, the block was finally quiet again, and this time, for the right reasons.